everyone. This is Jeanene Wolfe, your host of the Colleague Down the Hall podcast. I wanted to give a brief update today because I'm restarting something that was sort of the foundation of this podcast that I think is very important. Life got busy, things happened, and it sort of fell off my calendar, but I realized it was something really important. And that is the free fictionalized case consultation groups that I do typically once a month, where I invite a group of colleagues in, and I would love to have you join us. You'll be able to find the link in the show notes to sign up, and we will discuss a fictionalized case. So I will put together a case that has some aspect of maybe a gray area in our work, an ethical area that can be a conundrum, or just some type of experience that maybe it's something that I want to help normalize for people that they experience with clients. What I found is that it's so exciting to have a group of therapists there. Oftentimes I don't know some of the therapists. Usually there's a couple that come every time, which I love, but I really love having the new people come and see the camaraderie, people that have never met each other. By the end of the presentation, which is usually between 30 and 45 minutes, people are working together to share ideas, to support each other, to offer alternative thoughts. And it's a great way to understand the importance of clinical consultation and a really great way to understand how your participation can be such an important part of helping your fellow colleagues. So I invite you to listen to this replay of the very first episode where I talk about the ins and outs, do's and don'ts of clinical consultation. And then episodes 2 and 3, which come right after that one, are actually some fictionalized case consultation groups that I did. And then the replays of these get put right here on the Colleague Down the Hall podcast, so other people can hear about what they get put. And then the recordings get put right here on the Colleague Down the Hall podcast and my YouTube channel so that other people can hear about how we managed the case, the discussions that we had, how to participate respectfully. And that it's just a way that we can support each other in this field and also provide some valuable benefit for our colleagues. So I hope you enjoy the following episode. So I'd like to invite you to join us on the very next session, which will be October 22nd at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Like I said, you can sign up with a link in the show notes, and that way you will have access to the link to join that day. Please be aware, I do request that participants have their camera on for the entire session. This is not only respectful, but it also allows for vulnerability. It's very hard to share thoughts and opinions and feel vulnerable if you don't know who's behind the camera. That's good practice anyway in case consultation groups, but it's especially important because I'm bringing a group of people together that don't know each other. And so this allows for a little more vulnerability for those participating. I hope to see you on the 22nd. Take care, and thank you for joining us today.
I'm Jeanene Wolfe. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I am located in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And before I forget, I live near a naval base. So we get to enjoy the sound of freedom on a regular basis. So if you hear a noise in the background, it's probably a jet. It's not a running toilet, which people often think. They've not been flying all week and then they've been flying all morning. So, there's nothing I can do about that. So if that's in the background, we'll just have to work around it. So I'm in the state of Virginia. I see clients in Virginia and also in Florida. The reason all of this came to be is because I went into solo private practice in 2016. I was absolutely not prepared for how lonely and isolated I was going to be. And all of a sudden I realized I'm having imposter syndrome. I felt like my skills were stagnating. I wasn't happy. It wasn't the experience that I expected to have. I loved everything else about having my own practice, making my own policies, setting my schedule, all the things that I wanted to be able to do and have more independence. So what did I do? First of all, I found therapist Facebook groups on Facebook. And that seemed fabulous at first, but I really quickly realized that was not a safe or appropriate place to get peer consultation. It's a fabulous place to connect with colleagues. I've so enjoyed getting to know colleagues. There are people that only this year I've known for years, and only this year I met them for the first time. And that was really cool. And so it's a wonderful way to develop relationships and meet other people and get more generic questions answered, but it's not ideal for case consultation. So what I did was I created the program that I run, Collaborasis consultation groups, where I put therapists in small groups, 6 to 8 people. They're mostly closed. If someone leaves, we do bring in a new member. And the whole foundation of the program is about benevolence and support and showing up for each other and allowing each other to feel safe enough to get vulnerable. And over the time, I wanted to do this for an educational purpose, for people to sort of get reacquainted with what consultation with peers can look like. But people also ask me all the time, like, what actually happens in your groups? And of course, it depends on the day and who's there and what's going on in the world. But primarily it's case consultation, but we also are there to support each other as colleagues, to normalize imposter syndrome, to normalize fears that we have about cases. And today we talked, I had a group right before this, which was a bad scheduling mistake on my part, but we talked mostly about business issues today, just with private practice and how many clients you should be seeing, and how we're having the summer slump for the first time since the pandemic started, and people are struggling with that. So all of those things can get talked about in a consultation group. So if you're in a group with people, I would encourage you to make sure that you've allowed the parameters for that, because it's so much more than just the clients that we're doing in this field. I also heard from so many people about bad experiences they've had in consultation groups, where it was just a big group. There were no parameters. They didn't know each other, and people were not very kind about information that was being shared or the way someone was handling a case. And that can be disheartening. And I've had people say, I didn't think I would ever join another consultation group because my experience before was so very awful. And it shouldn't be that way. And then it also is different than when we did supervision, or when you present cases in a formal way. So it's not supervision, because everyone here in this group, now we will be discussing fictionalized cases, but when you're getting peer consultation, it's not supervision, in that with consultation, you are solely responsible for the outcome of your case, unlike supervision, where your supervisor is also responsible for the outcome of your case. And then you don't have to present cases in a formal way. In fact, some of the times someone will hear someone present a case and they'll go, oh, I have a question. It just made me realize that I have a question about this case that triggered something in my mind that I needed to ask that it wasn't even thinking about. And so they're able to just sort of launch in without any preparation, which is fine, because, and sometimes they'll even say, let me pull up my file really quick so I can make sure I'm getting some of the demographic information correct. So all of those things are things that are acceptable and a part of this type of experience. What I wanted to do, the hesitation, I've been actually wanting to do this for 2 years. And the hesitation I had was that I wanted people to be kind and supportive. And I also wanted it to be as authentic as possible. I wanted people to be able to discuss real aspects of cases. So the 2 cases that I'm presenting today are actually nuances of a variety of different cases that I've sort of pulled together, but it's the nuance of the decision-making that's happening in that case, or the stuck point that the therapist has. So it's less about the age and the sex and all the things going on with the client, and more about these gray areas and how we manage them as clinicians. And so finally settled on the fact that if I used fictionalized cases about issues that we face, that might be a good way to do this. So that's what I'm doing today. I'm excited about it. I hope it goes as well as I'm planning it will. So I just want to say, when I onboard people into my program, and I want to set the tone here, I let everyone know that the most important thing that you can bring to the table today is to be respectful and collaborative. I want today to honor the really hard work that we do. We work really hard, and showing kindness and support to each other is the most respectful way we can support each other. So why do we need peer consultation? I think a lot of times once we get through supervision, whether you paid for it or you're an agency where it's provided and it was a lot of work, we're so relieved that it's done that we kind of just want to get out there and do their own thing. But I find that, like I said earlier, there's a lot of reasons that that's not a good idea. And if you don't have that colleague down the hall that you can touch base with regularly, even if you have colleagues down the hall, but you're not meeting on a regular basis, it's still important to have this. It helps you build skills. I feel like every time I'm with a group, I leave a better therapist because I've heard something that I didn't know before. I've heard a perspective I didn't know before. And so it's really helpful to be able to learn from each other. It also gives you exposure to other types of therapeutic modalities and orientations. I encourage people for consultation groups to not just have people that are there practicing their same modality or that have the same level of experience. What I found to be the case, and I encourage people to be open to this, is that by having a mixed group, newer clinicians and more seasoned clinicians, as well as having people with different types of specialties and orientations, you get a really rich experience. And so when you have these newer clinicians, what they do, they bring to the table is their passion and the excitement, all the things that when we were new therapists, our idealism, all the wonderful things that eventually lead into becoming jaded as a therapist because you're tired, it's hard work, you're not necessarily getting the support you need. So the newer clinicians infuse the group with that great energy, and that's wonderful. And I think that's why a lot of people do supervision, because they enjoy working with newer therapists who are still excited and passionate. And sometimes they have a perspective that we forget about. It's not rare for a seasoned clinician to be presenting a case and a newer clinician to say, I'm just wondering if maybe you didn't spend enough time building rapport. Maybe you're just working a little bit too quickly with this client. And that's so easy to do when you're seasoned because you know the path. Especially if you have a niche that you work with, you know the path, you know where you want them to go, and you're ready for things to start happening. And sometimes that's not what you need. And so we can all learn from the people who are newer, who maybe their skills in some ways are a little more sharp than ours because they're more present in the front of their minds. You can also develop professional relationships for support, which we all need in this field. I am a huge proponent of putting ourselves in the equation. I don't think we're trained this way, and we need to, when we're going through school, it's all about the client. What are the client's needs? What's best for the client? How can we be objective? How can we support them? And I agree with all those things. And we need to include the therapist as well. So if you're working with a niche that something in your personal life is happening, and now that niche is happening in your personal life, you might say, I need to take a step back and reassess if I can keep working with these people. So an example is raising a teenage son. It was hard at times. I have other kids, but he was by far the hardest to raise. And I was working at a group practice, and I went in one day and I said, no more teen boys. I just can't do it. I can't be objective. I'm struggling at home. And that should be okay. And I think sometimes people feel ashamed or prohibited from doing that because they're never given permission that your needs get to count as well. And that goes to the number of people in your caseload, what clients you're seeing. I feel like so much more of this has come to light in the past couple of years. And I think that's a good thing, that we do have choices ourselves about who we're serving and who we can serve best, and what restrictions we can put in place to protect our own selves and our own mental health. The other thing that happens in consultation is that you can get affirmed and things be normalized. So someone might say something like, oh my gosh, I'm so struggling with progress notes right now. And 4 other people will be like, I'm so glad you brought that up. I'm really struggling with that too. Or someone's feeling insecure about a case, and their colleagues are able to say, before I give you a suggestion, I just want you to know that this sounds like a really difficult case. So I hope you are giving yourself a little bit of grace here, that you are working with a difficult case and this is taking a toll on you. And then of course, improving documentation skills is another benefit. And I feel like all of us need that. I know there's some therapists out there that teach documentation that probably feel 100% confident in what they're doing, but most therapists feel, in my opinion, somewhat insecure about their documentation. And it's especially so if you take insurance, because there's a lot at stake if you're not documenting the right way, and nobody wants to have money recouped because they didn't have something in a note that they should have been. should have had there. Okay. And so the other thing with peer consultation is that safety is vital, that people need to show up. They need to feel they're going to be treated respectfully. They need to understand that they're not going to be judged. They might be given suggestions. They might be given little nudges about things they need to consider differently, but they're going to be supported. And so showing up with an attitude of support and benevolence to me is the most important way you can participate in a peer consultation group. And that means doing things such as using supportive language. There is so much terminology in our world right now that's changing. It's really hard to keep up with it. And so if there's someone in your group who's using terminology that's no longer the preferred terminology, you can simply say, I don't think you're aware, but this is my field, or I have experience in this area, and there's a preferred term that I would share with you. And it can be done in a kind manner. It doesn't have to be, no one's using that term anymore, that's ableist, or whatever. So there's lots of ways we can do that the way we show up. The most important thing we can do in consultation is get curious, ask questions. If you're hearing someone present a case and you're feeling like, oh, that sounds off, or I would never do it that way, ask questions. Find out what are the other dynamics that you may be missing. And I think that's one of the things that gets lost in the Facebook groups, is that there's so much more to a case than just the information someone has presented. So when people come at somebody saying like, you should never handle the case that way, we need to also trust that our colleagues are trained and we're using our experience and our intuition in the way we manage cases. And so it's not all just what we see at face value. Back to benefits. One of the things that I love about having mixed groups is that you get this hive mind process that's really amazing. So you might have a CBT therapist who's in a group with people who are psychodynamic or use IFS or solution-based brief therapy or come from a schema perspective. And they're going to bring this unique lens to your case that you never could have imagined. And I've seen that happen over and over, where someone will be like, oh my God, like the whole case is just opened up for the therapist because they've had an aspect brought into it that's not in their wheelhouse that they didn't consider, but they're like, that's so obvious. Like, yes, that is going to be so helpful. I'd also like to just make sure people know that more than one suggestion may be a good fit. And multiple suggestions allows for growth and for the therapist to customize the feedback that they're going to then implement with their case. So if one person says, this is what I would suggest, the next person, we need to in our mind say, and this is their suggestion, and this other person has this other suggestion. It's not that they're saying what you said wasn't valid. They're saying there's lots of different ways we can approach cases, and we're informed by so many different things in our training and our experience that getting multiple suggestions is actually a good idea. And very often, by the time you finish the consultation, it's not unusual for a therapist to say, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. I know exactly which way I'm going. And that's, of course, what we want. We also need to remember confidentiality is important. It's good to, when you're working with real cases, to de-identify them as much as possible. When you are in a group presenting a case, you don't need to have a specific question. And sometimes people feel anxious about presenting a case if they don't say, like, this is what I need from the people in the group. Sometimes someone will say, I have a case, but I don't know what I need. And so we'll say, just start talking, because most of us can pretty quickly pick up on the nuances where they're feeling a little bit stuck, or where they're struggling a little bit, or maybe even a dynamic that we have experience with that we can say, like, maybe this is a piece of the case that you haven't considered that might be impacting you. So really, in my opinion, to have a really rich, successful consultation group, you want to be able to have people that can just show up informally and talk. And it doesn't all need to be formal the way it is in some settings where you need to present cases in a formal way. It's also important to keep in mind that the license type and state of licensure can cause differences in treatment approaches, ethical guidelines, legalities, and all of this is okay. So if someone is saying something that is not appropriate in your state, you can say from an educational perspective, oh, in my state, we're not allowed to do that. And that person might say, oh, it didn't occur to me to check my state to see if that was okay. Or they might say, yeah, that's perfectly fine in my state. So again, we're not jumping to conclusions. We're allowing people to present information, and then we are taking that back to do with what we will, but also knowing we were having a conversation in this group earlier today about practicing in different states. And there's what is the state? What is the licensure? Is insurance involved? There's so many different factors. And so being open to the complexity of presenting a case can be really helpful.